Well, I think that most people think of Chapter 7, and because it's a liquidation bankruptcy, often I find that people believe that they're going to lose all of their property. And actually, that's not true. Now, I should tell you that in the United States of America, we have a very lenient system, in my opinion, and particularly we're here in California, you're able to utilize under liquidation what we call exemptions. Now, the easiest way I've found to explain this is frankly something that I got the idea from one of my clients, and it has to do with marbles. And you think, what does marbles have to do with bankruptcy? Well, probably nothing, but let me just explain the analogy. Okay, so the analogy is, imagine here on this table, we've got a jar, an empty jar. Let's just call it an empty jar. Now, the way it works is when you file bankruptcy, on day one, there creates what we call a bankruptcy estate. Okay, so the bankruptcy estate, now let's imagine that everything that you own, with a couple exceptions. For example, you can protect up to over $1 million, almost 1.1 million in retirement funds. So that doesn't even go into the jar. So think of it this way. You could actually file a liquidation bankruptcy and be a millionaire on paper. I haven't had that client yet, but what I have had is I've had a lot of people come in who say, you know what, I spent $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 of my retirement money trying to keep the boat afloat. And for any of you out there, if you just want some free advice, I'm going to tell you right now, do not take money out of your retirement account to pay creditors, especially unsecured creditors. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, let's get back to the analogy and the illustration of how exemptions work. Okay, so the day you file your bankruptcy, there's this bankruptcy estate that's created. That means all of your debt, all of your property becomes part of the bankruptcy estate. So we're going to illustrate that with this jar here. Now, think of red marbles as your debts and green marbles as your assets. So the day you file, you have to put all of your marbles into the jar. And that's the idea I got from my client one time, because a lot of times people say, do I have to list this? Do I have to include this in my bankruptcy? Well, include is a word I don't like to use when talking about bankruptcy because I think it causes a lot of confusion. The disclosure is what we need to talk about. So you have to disclose all your assets, and they become part of this bankruptcy estate. Okay, so you put all your green marbles in there, which are your assets. You put all of your red marbles in there, which are your debts. Now, we have this exemption system. Okay, now there's different schemes. I'm not going to get too technical today, but what I'm going to tell you is that there's things you get to keep. So think of reaching in to the jar, grabbing out a green marble, and putting it back in your pocket. That means it's something that's protected, that you have a protected interest in. So, you know, all the clothes on your back, a certain amount of a vehicle, so you don't lose your car, and especially if you have a car loan, if you continue to make payments, you're not going to lose that. You actually have what we call a wild card. Some people call it the grub stake exemption. And the reason that's important is because you can protect about $26,000 worth of anything. It can be cash in the bank. So you're definitely not going to be completely wiped out. And there's a lot of other specific exemptions, home furnishings. I mean, all of the furniture in your house you can probably keep unless you have, I usually use the example of, say, a baby grand piano that you could sell at a garage sale for, or at the liquidation sale for more than $650. Well, you may have paid $5,000 for your dining set, but at a garage sale, you're not going to get more than $650 for it. So all of that is protected, okay? Vehicles, any money that you put away for your child's education, all of that is protected under what we call the exemption scheme. Okay, so what happens now to this jar? What about all the red marbles? Well, what happens in Chapter 7 bankruptcy is the courts appoint a trustee. And the trustee's job is to find out if there are any assets that the trustee can take over. We call administer those assets and liquidate them, sell them, and make a payment out to creditors. So the payment to creditors is only going to be if you have assets that are not exempt. So let's say, just to use the wild card or grub stake exemption example, you had $126,000 worth of cash in your account, but you had $1 million worth of debt. Okay, you get to keep the $26,000 because that's your exempted amount. The $100,000 would go to the trustee, and they would pay 10% to all the creditors using the $1 million worth of debt example.